hammered out as opposed to just having really horrible communication and relations for months or years. A lot better. So the origins of conflict that are included in this sheet are basically like there's disagreements and misunderstanding about your mission or the shared values. And so a lot of times returning back to your cooperative mission and values and vision can kind of reorient that direction and how you're going to come to terms with the conflict. The second one is disagreements and misunderstandings over what's actually happened. So like a good way to combat this sort of conflict is to actually keep really good notes during meetings, communicate in writing if necessary, but really face-to-face is the way to be most clear when you're talking to people, especially around conflict. And then there's differences in personality and working styles and the way people process basically different information. So a good way to preempt this is to really dive into knowing each other before a conflict happens, so you can understand that people have different communication styles and like how, say like Haley and I in the Diggers would deal with a problem differently, and like if she has a problem with me, how I would like that to like play out. Like maybe Haley doesn't want to be directly confronted and wants it in writing or something, and it could just make it worse if you don't understand that. The third basic cause of conflict in cooperatives can be like differences in cultures and ethnics and the styles of people. And so this is hard to differentiate from just personality styles and actual forms of oppression and power that are larger than just the dynamics within the co-op. But thinking about the terms of like what the differences in culture are and that can create problems around communication is really just an issue of trying to understand what those cultural norms are for different people. There's no real right or wrong answers. We can only really become aware of them and try to adjust our behavior within reason to accommodate people that are different than us. Not to feel threatened by these things. What does have a right or wrong answer is like differences in power which have to do with hierarchy and oppression. The list here is age, race, gender, ability, class, but there's obviously more. So what's really going on here, and I think will there be an anti-oppression segment to the Co-op Academy?
I think there's a segment.
At some point.
Yeah.
So we'll be going more into anti-oppression and communication around this in a different way, but I think understanding that there's power structures that are socialized into society that give certain people more power and influence, mostly who are adult white men, heterosexual, able-bodied, with a lot of class power. So myself, for instance. So the thing here is that like recognizing that the responsibility is on the people with privilege in this relationship to understand how this extra power is given to them. It's not about them getting educated by various people that they happen to be oppressing in their group. And so really tackling these things within the co-op and looking at ways of dismantling these relationships is really important. And to do that early before it becomes a really bad problem is a good idea. Let's see, is there? Oh, it's. So going back to our steps, once you kind of like understood the causes of the conflict, and obviously all of those are going to be overlapping in different forms, and there's probably ones that aren't included on that list, but you want to negotiate an action plan, and so most of these problems are going to be more than one-time conversations. So it helps to make a plan. Whoop. All right, so we've got, this sheet's also included in your binder. So they've got, this is from the Aorta Collective that does conflict resolution and a lot of really good anti-oppression trainings. And they have this sheet, amongst others, about conflict resolution. So the first thing in setting up the steps is to basically have a neutral space where people feel private, safe, and there's actually the time set aside to tackle this problem, so it doesn't feel like it's rushed and there can be no real resolving of anything. The next is to set up community agreements. Community agreements shouldn't be set up by just a facilitator. They should be set up by everyone in the group, so that way there's a lot of ownership over these. For instance, things like, let's see, some non-negotiables, like we're gonna try the process in good faith, we're gonna, step up, step back, things like that should really be in place before things get heated. And then the third step is, how do people feel and what is happening? This is probably the longest step, and one that people will return to a lot when they're dealing with problems in their co-op or collective. As a facilitator, you should be trying to steer people away from how others have made them feel, and instead talk about how they are feeling. So instead of being like, I feel like you don't care, blah, 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 saying I feel disrespected. And a lot of times this will reveal a lot of what's going on, and that a lot of people don't have a different idea of what has happened or what is happening. Let's see. Avoid going into long, protracted narratives of what has happened. Useful questions facilitators can bring up, or how do you perceive the conflict to be? How were you affected? How are you still being affected? The fourth step in their resolution plan is, what are your needs and wants? And as a facilitator, this means identifying needs versus wants, but it's not essential that we distinguish between them. So listing these visually can help a lot. And then, what is each person going to do about it is the final step. This is not so much about what we want others to do about it, but what we are willing to do to help move forward towards a resolution. Even in instances where people have lost power and have been harmed, giving them the time to identify what they can do to move towards a resolution can be empowering. And I think an important thing is, once you've gone through a process like this, it's often sort of in the same way that when you go to a retreat, everyone feels really great after for the first day, and then no one does anything. It's a good idea to actually return to these agreements that have come out of this process and carry them through. Not only following through on commitments, but evaluating how all of this went, so you can understand the process itself as a cooperative. Because obviously you're going to have more than one problem. You won't defeat them all in one action plan, I'm sure. Unless you're really good. Apparently, that way so I think for the interactive session that I have, if you've got this sheet in your binder, it's the conflict resolution profile worksheet. If you can meet up with another member of your co-op, or if there's not another member of your co-op here today, with someone else who you can work with, and go through this checklist of ways you communicate in the co-op and how you would want to have conflict resolved within your cooperative. And so getting to know each other in terms of these communication styles can prevent a lot of basic conflicts between individuals and people in the co-op.
What are we supposed to do with this?
So there's a checklist, and so if you pair up with someone in your co-op, say you and Haley could just sit next to each other, and Scott too if he wants to do that or whatever. And going down and checking off what are the things that you would actually want to have happen and ways you want to communicate in terms of conflict. And then sharing that with your co-op members. Is this clear, or is this just crazy?
So I have a question. Just say which checking those things that matter to us. Checking those things that are true for you
Thank you.
personally.
Right.
So if you can know about